So let's speak with Chris Brannigan, former advisor to Boris Johnson when he was Prime Minister. Chris, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
I suppose you could call that classic Boris, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's if you press the Boris button, that's what you get. You get the thing that everyone expects, which is Boris coming out and being Boris.
Does it make a difference? Will it make a difference? Boris Johnson, is he a tainted brand now for the Conservatives, or do you think there is enough Tories, enough wavering Tories out there that still have a lot of love for Boris Johnson that might think, you know what, yeah, I will put my cross in the box marked Conservative?
So the numbers, as always, are the indicator. The polls have been narrowing over the last couple of days. People have seen this suddenly get a little bit closer. And Johnson is electoral catnip to voters. When he goes out and when he comes up with phrases like the ones that he was describing last night, when he's out there doing the thing that he does, the Boris Johnson issue, it changes people's minds. Out electioneering with Boris is like watching. It's like watching the second coming in some cases. People absolutely turn in the street and go out and support with him. Yeah. So if the numbers are that close, if the numbers do get to a point where I think the Times this morning said there's 130,000 votes in it between the supermajority and a hung parliament, Johnson is one of those factors that you can introduce even at this stage that changes people's minds. So if I was sitting in the number 10 strategy team or the Conservative Party headquarters strategy team, I'd have been deploying Project Boris and getting him out.
Is it a little too late, though? I mean, could they have done with him a couple of weeks ago, do you think?
Difficult to know within the strategy. Difficult to know if there has been a strategy, but difficult to know within the strategy.
I'm not sure there was a strategy, actually.
Whether he was going to, at what point he was going to be most useful for them. And I think maybe now when those final numbers are in, most parties, all the parties, about 48 hours before the result, normally get the closest, the most accurate polling figures available to them. And that might be the point. If I was looking for what was the ace up my sleeve, maybe this is the point at which I would have said, okay, this is the time to bring Boris back into the fray, because he does change people's minds. In the 2019 election, Ian, I met lots and lots of people who are out or canvassing on doorsteps, constituencies across the country, people who weren't going to vote for the Conservatives, but would vote for Boris Johnson specifically. Yeah. And despite everything that's happened between 2019 and now, that still remains the case. People will vote for Boris Johnson. If there's a waverer out there and it makes a difference and those vote margins are slim, maybe that's the thing that makes the difference.
What do you make of, I mean, opinion polls, opinion schmolls, and they can be all over the place. They have consistently been incredibly favourable, of course, to Starmer's Labour Party. As you rightly said at the very beginning of all of this, Chris, that they've narrowed a bit. But the Survation poll from yesterday was absolutely damning. We've seen a similar one to that about a week ago that shows the horrific prospect of the Conservatives returning with little more than the same amount of MPs than the Liberal Democrats have got. 64 MPs to Keir Starmer's 484. A scene in Westminster I think I could be confident to say we've never seen.
No, we've never seen it. Listen, polling, schmoling, Ian, as you accurately describe it, the base that they take those numbers from, what the spread is, there's clearly a science, and almost now a micro industry that sits up behind all of that. I think the bigger concern for the Conservatives is really not having enough members of Parliament to actually form an opposition. Yeah. There's got to be shadows for all the positions that Labour put forward as they're going to be the government, then chairs of select committees, government whips, and the crucial number for that is about 150. And if the Conservative Party are struggling to do it, what are we going to have? A coalition opposition?
What's the law there? Can you have a coalition opposition? Other than it sounds quite nice to roll off the tongue. But other than that, is it possible?
I think it'd be a complete nightmare. I think it'd be a complete nightmare. So, below that critical mass is where you're going to get those numbers. Yeah. I mean, we're entering uncharted territory here. So, aptly described by other commentators on this, the Labour majority, that vote share is going to be extraordinarily wide, but sort of quite shallow. It's not going to matter. What's going to matter is that there aren't going to be enough, if those polls are correct, there aren't going to be enough Conservative MPs to form, a coherent opposition toward the Labour Party. That poses any number of different challenges. But I think that's much more of a concern at the moment than anything else they might be worrying about.
Absolutely incredible times. What is your own assessment, if I can ask you that, Chris, in terms of the likely result of all of this? I think we can all, no matter where our political affiliations are, acknowledge that it would be extraordinary if it wasn't a thumping win for Labour. But what do you think realistically the Conservatives can return to Westminster?
So the most dismal analysis I hear most of the time, Ian, is double figures. That's deeply alarming.
Yeah.
And when I cut through the noise, when I've listened to people whose analysis of this I think is accurate, and who previously past don't get caught up in the hyperbole of all of this situation, most of them have said double figures. I mean, maybe the deployment of Boris last night changes that and brings it, up into up into the triples. But there are some big constitutional issues coming ahead. If the majority that's predicted is as significant as it can be, I still don't think it's too late. I still think there's lots of people who I've spoken to, and I've spoken to people across a number of constituencies over the last 6 weeks, who are very, very secret Tories, and they've always have been out there. They've always been trying to sort of hide their votes. And I think when they get into that polling booth tomorrow, that's the point at which they'll make their decision based upon what they've heard in recent days. And so I still think it's too close to call. I think the last 6 weeks, it's looked as dire as it possibly can be. From here on in, after tomorrow, that's the only poll that counts.
And if you took reform out of the equation, because there are some people who, a lot of reform people argue, they say, no, it's not that, we are taking votes from the Conservatives. People are choosing to vote for us. They come from all over the political stratosphere. If reform were not standing in this election, how different would the conversation be that we're now having?
Yeah, undoubtedly. I mean, it would make a difference. The late emergence of Nigel Farage into the fray has clearly changed things. I think what's happened is that when you're looking at seats where there would normally be much more of a contest between the two major parties, reform splits that vote a little bit. I mean, and Labour have got their own issues with some of those in other areas, like with the Green Party, with Galloway, with anyone else who just dilutes that vote a little bit more. So reforms had that effect upon the Tories, undoubtedly, and that would have changed it. Maybe that puts you at the sort of 150 mark that might be the realistic expectation.
Yep, that you need.
But the challenge of all of that, if Farage's intent is to do a Trump type approach for the Republican Party and thinks that entryism is going to go and work, I'm not sure that's got sustainability past all that, because there's nothing left to work with. There's nothing left to build with. I think it may well end up being a strategic own goal.
And isn't it funny how, just a final point on this, Chris, it's so strange how when Boris returned in 2019 with that 80-odd seat majority, we can argue forever about the reasons why it all went pear-shaped, but all the conversation at the time was, this is Boris Johnson not for one but for 2 terms, and nobody really disagreed with that. Nothing had gone wrong in Scotland at that point, of course, which is pivotal to any potential Labour win, and then everything gradually started to crumble, including Scotland, which of course opened the door for a very different narrative for Keir Starmer and Labour. And something that was, quite literally unthinkable has actually happened here.
I agree. I think that, the analysis after the 2019 election result, I think from both political parties, both from the Conservatives and from the Labour Party, there was a real point at which, in essence, the Conservative Party could have been in government 2030. That was the long-term strategic view that people take, the plan that worked around all that and how it was going to be. And so, the Labour Party have done a phenomenal job at realigning their strategy, working toward their objectives, getting some, real focus and genuine discipline into their party to be able to ensure there's a coherence in message, a coherence in narrative, a discipline amongst their candidates. If the Conservatives come to the far side of all of this and end up, slicing chunks off each other the way that they've done for the last 3 or 4 years, that really will be the case for the Labour Party. They will be in for sort of 2 or 3 terms. Yeah. So the issue is that all looks like plain sailing when it's theoretical, Ian. That all looks like plain sailing when you're sitting inside the closeted environment, the morning after the 2019 election result, thinking, I've got decades to be able to go and push all this into effect. The events that kick in, COVID, Ukraine, potential for sort of future conflict, that unseats agendas and schedules very, very quickly. Yeah. And I think if Labour are praying for anything within the next 5 years of this government, is that it will be for a quiet time.
We will watch with interest. And we will speak again, Chris. It's been great to have a chat on this. Thank you for your time. He's Chris Brannigan, former top advisor to Boris Johnson when he was there in number 10.